Have you ever called somebody a lunatic? Or perhaps you heard somebody say, that guy is a complete lunatic. She's a lunatic. Don't listen to him. He's a lunatic. Usually, when we use the word today, we mean that somebody is crazy. They're behaving strangely. They're saying things that seem completely irrational. Maybe they're doing something that makes everybody else stand there thinking, what is wrong with this person? But let me tell you where the word gets really interesting. Hello, everybody. Psycho back. Today we're talking about lunatics, crazy people. But is it just that? Let me tell you about it. Well, because lunatic has a much deeper meaning than simply being an insult for somebody who's crazy. To understand it, we have to go back quite a long way. The word comes from the Latin word luna, the moon. Yes, the moon. That big, bright thing in the sky that humanity has been staring at for thousands of years, well, trying to figure out what it might be doing to us. And that's actually where the original idea of a lunatic comes from. A lunatic was essentially somebody who was believed to be affected by the moon. The idea was that certain forms of madness or unusual behavior could be influenced by the phases of the moon. And honestly, when you think about the world that people lived in hundreds of or thousands of years ago, it's not particularly difficult to understand why they might have thought that. They could see the moon changing, they could see the tides changing, they knew the moon had a measurable effect on the earth. And then they noticed that sometimes people behave strangely. So naturally, somebody eventually asked, could the moon be affecting people too? And that question gave us the word lunatic. Now, were they right? Well, that's where the things get really interesting. Modern science has not established that the phases of the moon cause people to become mentally ill or dramatically alter human behavior in the way people historically believed. There have been studies looking for relationships between the full moon and things such as psychiatric emergencies, crime accidents, births, sleep, and other behaviors. And the results have generally not supported the dramatic version of the old lunar theory. But I don't think that's the most interesting part. The interesting part is that people were trying to explain something they did not understand. They saw a pattern. They came up with an explanation, and that's something human beings, we still do that today, constantly. We see something strange, we don't understand it, so we create a possible explanation. This is even done in modern science, although they don't always want us to know. Sometimes we are right, sometimes we are wrong, and sometimes we simply don't have enough information to maybe ever know. That is one of the reasons I find the word lunatic so fascinating. Because somewhere along the way, the original meaning disappeared. We stopped thinking about the moon. We just started using the word to describe somebody we thought was crazy. And eventually, it became an insult. Lunatic! You're insane. You're irrational. You're out of your mind. You're not worth listening to. Some people think I'm a lunatic. And that's where I think language becomes particularly interesting. Because when you call somebody a lunatic, you're often not actually disproving anything they've said. You're just dismissing them. And sometimes that's justified. There are certainly people who say ridiculous things. I know I do sometimes. There are people who believe things without evidence. I catch myself doing that as well at times. I try not to. There are people who make extraordinary claims and then become angry when anybody asks for proof. But calling somebody a lunatic doesn't demonstrate that they're wrong. It just tells us that you don't agree with them. And those are two very different things. If somebody tells me aliens built the pyramids, I can respond, that's nonsense. Or I can ask, why do you believe that? And then we can examine the evidence. Maybe the evidence is terrible. Maybe the explanation falls apart immediately. Fine, but at least we've investigated it. And perhaps that's something we have lost a little bit in modern society. We're increasingly comfortable dismissing people rather than engaging with what they're saying. You're crazy. You're stupid. You're a conspiracy theorist. I am. Supposedly that's bad. I don't think it is. You're an idiot. You're a lunatic. Okay. But what did they actually say? That's the question I'm more interested in. Because sometimes people who sound completely crazy are simply wrong. Or sometimes they're onto something. And sometimes they're asking a perfectly reasonable question but have arrived at a terrible explanation for it. Those are three completely different things, and we should not confuse them. There is another interesting aspect to the word. The moon has had an enormous influence on human culture. We've built calendars around it, we've created myths around it, we've written songs and poems about it. We've associated it with gods, spirits, fertility, madness, transformation, and mystery. Even today, we continue to wonder about it. Some people think it's hollow. Some people think it's made of cheese. Well, they used to. Anyway, perhaps it isn't entirely surprising that something as strange and powerful looking as the moon became associated with strange behavior. But here's what I want, uh, where I want to bring this back to the modern meaning of the word. What actually makes somebody a lunatic? Is it believing something unusual? Is it believing something that most people don't believe? Is it believing something without sufficient evidence? Or is it simply being wrong? Because those aren't the same thing. If being wrong makes somebody a lunatic, then we're all lunatics. Every single one of us have been wrong at some point in time. And probably many times actually, a lot of things, including myself, especially myself, because I'm a bit of a conspiracy theorist. So I love to explore crazy thoughts. So and yeah, oftentimes I'm wrong. And I actually think being comfortable with that is important because one of the most dangerous things we can do is become so attached to our beliefs that changing our minds feels like losing. It isn't. Changing your mind because you've discovered better information is not weakness, it's intellectual strength. And that's where I think the word lunatic can teach us something. Don't be afraid of being considered strange. I am considered strange. That's why my nickname is Psycho. But also, don't use being strange as proof that you're right, which I think I managed not to do. I'm not sure what's right and wrong anymore, but I'm trying to find the truth. And right or wrong, those are two different things. You should not believe something just because everybody else believes in it. But you also shouldn't believe something just because everyone else says, ho, 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 that's not true. Uh, Basically, choosing the underdog, right? Don't do that. Both can be forms of conformity. You're choosing sides. If everybody says that's impossible, you should not automatically say, therefore, it must be true. We do this with governments. Like the government tells us something and we turn it into conspiracy theory because governments lie, right? But You should not automatically say, therefore, oh, excuse me, if everybody says that's obviously true, uh, where was I? I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. So you should, if everybody says that's impossible, you shouldn't automatically say, therefore, it must be true, because it's not necessarily true. If everybody says that's obviously true, you should not automatically say, therefore, it must be false. Instead, ask questions, look for evidence, look for opposing evidence, try to understand why people disagree, and most importantly, be willing to discover that you are wrong. Because that's where learning actually happens. When you realize you thought something was true and then you realize it wasn't, or the opposite. That's a learning moment. Maybe that's the real lesson hidden inside this strange old world. A lunatic was once somebody believed to be affected by the moon. Today, it's somebody whose behavior or ideas are considered irrational. But perhaps the most important question isn't who is the lunatic. Perhaps it's who gets to decide who is the lunatic. Throughout history, perfectly ordinary people have been considered foolish, ridiculous, or even insane for believing things that later turned out to be true. And of course, countless people have believed absolutely ridiculous things that turned out to be exactly that, ridiculous. So, being called a lunatic doesn't prove you're right, but it doesn't prove you're wrong either. And that's why I don't think we should be quite so frightened of unusual ideas. We should be frightened of something else, certainty without understanding. Because once you become convinced that you already know everything, you no longer need to investigate anything. And that's kind of where the world is going now. They're trying to convince us about things. And this is what you see in the conspiracy theories about the Project Bluebeam. They're trying to basically make us docile so we don't investigate, we just believe, we just trust, and we just give this one world government their power. Don't do that. Anyway, as I was saying, so don't become so convinced you already know everything that you don't longer that you no longer need to investigate. You don't need evidence. You don't need questions. You don't need discussion. You've already decided, and that's when curiosity dies. So the next time somebody calls you a lunatic, you could get angry, you could insult them back, or you could simply ask, why do you think I'm a lunatic? Why do you think I'm wrong? What evidence do you have of me being wrong? What am I missing? And perhaps after that conversation, one of you will change your mind. Or perhaps neither of you will. That's fine too. Because sometimes the purpose of a conversation is not to win, sometimes it's simply to understand the other party. And I've said this before actually. Just because you're right does not mean I'm wrong. Remember this the 6 9? I'll see it here. Think about that. Really, that's what I like about the word lunatic. It reminds us that people have always tried to explain the strange things around them, the moon, madness, human behavior, reality itself, and we're still doing it. We're just using different words now. So, are you a lunatic? I don't know. Maybe. Am I? Probably, depending on who you ask. But I think I'll happily remain a little bit lunatic if it means remaining curious. Because I'd rather ask ridiculous questions and discover that I'm wrong than never ask the question at all. And if you're going to call me a lunatic, at least tell me why. Because I might learn something. And if I don't, well, I'll probably just blame the moon. So here's my final thought: hold your convictions firmly enough to explain them, but lightly enough to change them. Don't blindly trust me. Don't blindly trust anybody. Do your own research. Ask difficult questions. Challenge assumptions, including your own. And if you discover something that proves me wrong, let me know. Then we'll both have learned something. Now, if you'd like to help and support the channel and keep these conversations going, you can do that financially if you're able and willing. But if you don't want to contribute financially or you cannot, that's absolutely fine. Please just subscribe, like, comment, and share. Those things really help me out and it encourages me to keep making this content. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for your patience. I guess I've already told you to like, subscribe. I'll see you all on the next one. Peace be upon you all.